Thank you so much. Well, good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Welcome to the 5th Annual Delta State University of Florida Civil Rights History Symposium. We are so honored and humbled by your presence. President LaForge, students, members of the community, and friends. This is a great week for all of us. It's so exciting for us at the University of Florida to be able to be with you here. We have been doing this now for 5 years, and really Professor Arlene Sanders, who we owe a great round of applause to, is really our local organizer. My name is Paul Ortiz. I'm a professor of history at the University of Florida, and I have the great honor of directing the Samuel Proctor Oral History Program. And I'd like our visiting students from the University of Florida, if you would stand briefly to be acknowledged. Every fall we travel to the Mississippi Delta, and this year we started actually down in Macomb, Mississippi, to record, to interview veterans of the civil rights movement. And sometimes colleagues from Florida ask us, why do you come to Mississippi? And we come to Mississippi because this is the state where it all happened. This is the state where people grappled with the deepest philosophical problems of our time. What is justice? What is freedom? What is democracy? And in the context of those problems, how should we pattern social relations to achieve social justice? It was fought out primarily not in California, not in New York, not even in Jacksonville or Atlanta, Georgia, but Mississippi was ground zero for the most important movement in American history.
That's right.
And that's why we come here from Gainesville, Florida, and we make the 12-hour trek. We call it an odyssey. It's as Hollis Watkins would say, it's a bonding experience. But we're so honored this year because we have something new for you, and that is your university president, President Bill LaForge, has agreed to provide a welcoming for us. You know him, so I won't give too much of an introduction for him. This is his announcement from his site, but we're just so honored that he's with us here today. He is a proud alumnus of Delta State University. He is an internationally recognized authority on public policy, has a very successful consulting business, is recognized by members of both Republican and Democratic parties on a national level for his expertise. He has law degrees from the University of Mississippi, Georgetown. He studied at Cambridge. He's a person who really needs no introduction, but we are just so honored to have him here today to welcome us on behalf of the university. President LaForge, please.
Good evening and welcome. Thank you, Paul, for that kind introduction. This is not about me. This is really not about Delta State. It's about something very important to a lot of people, and you all are great to come here and celebrate this. And I want to extend a special warm welcome to our colleagues from the University of Florida. You think you know what a gator is, and you have gators in Florida. But I want to tell you that we had a very unique situation here on this campus a couple of weeks ago. One Saturday morning, I was asked to welcome a group over in our Performing Arts Center, which I did. And I wasn't quite sure what I was getting into, and I went in and I realized who they were. It was our Fish and Wildlife people from the state, and they were holding a 4-hour seminar preparing for the gator season in Mississippi. And sure enough, 2 weeks later, the season opened. So you can take this back to your gator fan colleagues back at Gainesville and tell them that we just set records in Mississippi with 3 harvests exceeding 700 pounds apiece. These are not gators, they're monsters. So we welcome you. This is an important conference, and we appreciate very much that you all chose Delta State to come. Arlene is a great treasure for us here. Our diversity committee here on this campus is very, very involved with so many aspects of what we do here. This is an important commitment that we have made, and it's a wonderful thing to be with Margaret and others here who are local heroes and Georgia State heroes across the spectrum here in academia and others. It has been my privilege to have a long affiliation with Delta State. I grew up here. This was a special place for me. My dad was an arts and science dean on this campus. And it was fortunate for me, and I think it helped lead me to where I am today, that I grew up in a household of justice and fairness. And you all know what I mean, because I grew up in a town that was surrounded by a lot of activity, some of which was not a very proud part of Mississippi's history. And I was too young, for the most part, to understand and appreciate what was happening. And only when I came to college and went on to law school and got involved in my career did I fully appreciate what we have here and the struggles that have been made. And so it's a proud day for us to be able to speak historically and accurately about what happened. I graduated from Cleveland High School with the first African-American students and understand quite a bit about what public education has gone through in the Delta. So it's a thrill for me to come back and be a part of an institution that has meant so much to my family and to me and to this community over the years. Part of coming back meant for me the understanding and the realization that Mississippi has changed. And while we have a way to go, we have indeed changed. And that was a pleasant revelation to me. I consulted with a lot of friends in a lot of different communities, and I never once, underscore this, once had anyone come to me with a whisper campaign about the past. That by itself encouraged me to come home, because if I'd have heard that, it would have discouraged me, and I'm not sure I would have done it. 2 or 3 of you in the room, perhaps a few more, have heard a story, but I want to share this with you, and then I'm going to give up the podium. You know, you can't take the microphone away from a lawyer. But I want to tell you a story of something that is near and dear to my heart, and it goes beyond the struggles of Mississippi and the civil rights movement and of the Delta, and it's something that I saw on a grand scale. When I was working in the United States Senate for Senator Cochran back in the 80s, I traveled with a group of colleagues who were senior staff from the Senate to the Southern African states. And the purpose of the trip was to understand the evils and ills of apartheid, which was still in existence at that point. So we spent time in Zambia, Zimbabwe, and then eventually South Africa to see really what was going on. And this was just before things changed in the late 80s, early 90s. And in one particular meeting we had, which is a wonderful piece of my personal history that I revere, we met in Lusaka, Zambia, and the only reason we went there was to meet with the ANC. From the South African Nationalist Party point of view, the dreaded African National Congress. And we went so that we could hear the struggle and the movement from that side of the equation. And we met, as you would guess, certainly not inside the borders of South Africa, but in Zambia. And we met in a restaurant one night for dinner very late. It was about 9 or 10 o'clock when we started, and the dinner was the longest one I've ever been to, 4 hours. With not speeches, it was just sitting around. There were 5 or 6 of us and about 7 or 8 ANC top officials. And about 2 hours into the dinner, we switched seats so that we could have a different conversant, someone different to meet and talk with. And the lady who came around and sat by me at that point introduced herself as Barbara Masekela. And my instant response was, wow, that's a great name in the United States. We have a famous jazz artist named Hugh Masekela. And she put me right down on my feet at that moment, and she said, no, he's a South African jazz artist, and he is my brother. So I realized I was in the presence of royalty at that moment. And Barbara explained that she was the Minister of Social and Educational or Cultural Affairs for the ANC at that particular point. Well, we had a wonderful discussion. But fast forward from the late 80s to the early 2000s. I'm working in Washington. I'm in a law firm there. I'm involved with public policy. And one day I have the opportunity to meet the new South African ambassador to the United States. You guessed it, Barbara Masekela. Things do come full circle. The right things can happen. And so I encourage you all to continue your study of history. If we don't learn those history lessons, the lessons of the past, we're doomed to repeat those failures. And so I think what you're doing is wonderful here. I really value very much the oral histories that you all are doing and suggest that that be continued throughout the Delta. I welcome you to Delta State. We embrace what you're doing. We embrace what you are. We share with you the sense of diversity, the sense of multicultural nation and state and region. And we want you to be at home at Delta State and hope that you'll all come back again. Welcome.
Thank you so much, President LaForge. Let's give another round of applause to President LaForge. These slides in the background, as I go through a few more introductory remarks, are slides of past trips, past public programs, past oral history interviews. All of the oral history interviews that we conduct go back to local repositories here in the Delta. We are working with a group called the Sunflower County Civil Rights Organization. And Stacy White, who is a longtime organizer with that, is a person who I had interviewed her mother, Bernice White. Many of you know her. She was a key activist in the struggle in the 1950s and 1960s. Mrs. White passed away several years ago, but her daughter Stacy, who's a professor at Mississippi Valley State University, carries on that struggle. And she was the person that initially invited us back to the Delta and said, let's conduct oral histories with movement veterans. Let's get them in the hands of middle school kids, of high school kids, of community people, so that we can remember how we changed the world and maybe thinking about doing it again. So I want to acknowledge Stacy White from the Sunflower County. Is Stacy here yet? I don't think she can make it. She's not coming tonight. Okay. I also want to acknowledge a person who has become a treasured friend of the Samuel Proctor Oral History Program, the person who is our guide into the Delta, the person who opens all of the doors for us. She was a project coordinator with the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee in Bolivar County. She is a living legend, and none other than Miss Margaret Block. If you refer to our program this evening, you'll see the title of our panel is Violence, Nonviolence, and the Voting Rights Act of 1965. We are so privileged to have a wonderful panel. I will talk about them a little more later, but I just want to acknowledge all of them right now. Margaret Block, Ron Hurd II, and Akinyele Umoja. Please give a round of applause to our panelists. And also please silence your cell phones and other electronic devices. We also have some wonderful guests who traveled quite a ways to be with us. We want to acknowledge our colleague Jacqueline Dace, who is Mississippi Civil Rights Museum Project Manager. And Ms. Dace is doing incredible work getting a Mississippi State Civil Rights Museum going. Thank you, Jackie. Do we have the Macomb High School students with us yet, or are they still on their way? They will be joining us for the rest of this week, and they're going to be conducting oral histories with us. And just briefly, this is a remarkable group of high school students from a project called the Macomb Legacies Project. They are high school students. They are documenting the history of the freedom struggle in their own town, in their own county. In many cases, they're doing oral histories with their parents, their grandparents. And they're winning prizes. They're winning National History Day prizes for doing documentary film. And we have been so privileged. We've spent our first 2 days of the trip with them conducting oral histories, but they'll be joining us a bit later. The second to last announcement I want to make is we are really happy because not only is Professor Akinyele Umoja a powerhouse intellectual of the freedom movement, but he's just finished a wonderful book, which he's going to be speaking about tonight. And our colleagues at the Delta State University Bookstore are going to be bringing copies of that book a bit later for us to purchase and for him to sign, hopefully. So that should be, the book should be arriving probably midpoint of the program. So I want to remind folks about that. At this point, what I'd like to do is to invite one of our students, Joanna Joseph, to come forward. And Joanna is going to talk real briefly from a student perspective about what this trip means to her. Every year, we spend a lot of time vetting students. It's a very competitive process to get to go on the trip. All of these are honor students. They are amazing people. Joanna Joseph, for example, is a senior history major at the University of Florida. She's working on a senior honors thesis. The topic is the Jewish diaspora in the Caribbean and Haiti and other countries. This is her second trip with us, so please join me in welcoming Joanna Joseph.
Ronnie, you remind me of my uncle. As a student of history, it is an absolute honor to be welcomed into the Mississippi Delta. Whenever I told anybody that I was coming, they'd always ask why, with like this really incredulous look on their face, like, why go to Mississippi? And after my trip last year, when explaining why I was going again this year, it became so easy. For one, the Mississippi Delta is probably the most comfortable place I've ever been to in my entire life. People are so loving and so welcoming, and they treat you like family after you meet them for the very first time. Mississippi is gorgeous. Maybe it's just me, but I enjoy driving through the open fields, and being able to see the stars at night is really an honor. We don't have that in Miami. You see smog. And of course, the historian in me finds so much joy and stimulation in Mississippi. The Delta serves as a focal area of a critical changing point in American history. People of the civil rights movement, whose names we say with reverence, were people who walked up and down these streets with your parents and your grandparents. What a legacy of strength and honor Mississippians have, and to be able to join in that is something that I can never even explain in words. And that is enough for me to look forward to traveling to the Delta year after year. People may think they understand Mississippi history, they think they understand what goes on in Mississippi, but I truly believe that until they come and experience it for themselves, they'll never learn what true courage is, and they learn that from you. Thank you.
I'd like to now invite my colleague, my dear colleague, Professor Arlene Sanders, to come to the podium. Arlene, as you heard President LaForge earlier speak about her, is a critical member of the university community, but also the broader community, a longtime member of the diversity committee, and a person who is a panelist, I believe, Arlene, on our second panel that we had, and just gave an electrifying talk connecting intellectual activism with social activism, connecting the grassroots, neighborhood kind of organizing with how we think about building movements, how we think about creating movements now based on historical knowledge. And so without further delay, Professor Sanders, if you'd like to come up, I would greatly appreciate it.
Again, thank you all for coming. It's so important that we continue to study the civil rights movement, because if you don't understand your past, how do you know where you're going in the future? Or if you have the wrong idea of who you are and whose you are, you might be doomed. As Thomas Paine said, these are the times that try men's souls. And just as they were then, so are they too today. So let us continue in this struggle, in this quest, because we have not achieved parity in America. You may have heard the term post-racial, and everything is fine. But if you look around, if you pay attention to the U.S. Supreme Court decision that basically gutted a very important portion of the Voting Rights Act of 1965. That was a struggle. It was not a nonviolent struggle. Those who were activists, many of them were nonviolent. But there were those who perpetrated violence against those who were only seeking justice. In the words of our famous Mississippian soror, Fannie Lou Hamer, who were Black people who were just sick and tired of being sick and tired. So when you get sick and tired of being sick and tired, you take action. It's your turn now. If not you, who? If not now, when? I challenge you to stand up for justice, and stand up for righteousness.
Thank you so much, Professor Sanders. Wonderful words, wonderful thoughts, important thoughts to think about, to carry beyond this evening. It's just been made aware to me that Professor Umoja's books have arrived. They are out in the lobby. The DSU bookstore colleagues are setting up a nice promotional table for you. So again, folks, remember on your way out, in fact, you may want to jump up, it's okay, and get one now before they're gone. Because they will go quickly. Right, at this moment, I'd like to invite our three panelists to come to the table with us. And I'll just say a few things. Look at the program, and you will actually see some of our other treasured co-sponsors or organizers. I'm not going to mention their names, but they're on the very back. And on the inset, you will see introductions to each of our panelists. And again, I won't go over that. And what we're going to do tonight is we're going to do kind of a traditional panel. We've asked each of the panelists to go for 20 minutes each. And we've also asked the audience to hold your questions. We're going to do a Q&A afterwards. So if you have questions for the panelists, for individual panelists, please hold them until the very end of the program. Again, the order will go in the order of your program. We'll start with Margaret Block. We'll move to Mr. Hurd, and then to Professor Umoja as they're getting set up. And again, these are, you can see these signboards in back. These are from past trips that we've done. And these are excerpts from some of the oral histories. And these are photographs from some of the places that we visited. And we're all about trying to make history come to light. Please check out our table in front, because there's educational material up there. There's books. We'd love to have you browse and check out some of that material. So without further delay, I will turn it over to our first panelist, the esteemed Margaret Block.
Good evening. Y'all can do better than that. Y'all from the Delta. What y'all saying of that? Good evening. Thank you. Hey. I'm just gonna speak briefly. Of course, it's the 50th anniversary on the March on Washington, and I just want to acknowledge that since that was the greatest march that ever America has ever seen, because we wasn't just marching, we made accomplishments like the Voting Rights Act, the Civil Rights Act. Well, that was a part of it. But I want to talk a little bit about the march, because you know you saw Dr. King and all of the men up there on the podium. The only woman that was on the podium was Mahalia Jackson. And she was up there only because he wanted her to sing. Otherwise, she would not have been up there either. But it was the women that was the foot soldiers that did the leg work and the printing and everything, putting out, organizing meetings, putting out leaflets. My fingers stayed black for a month because we didn't have all of this technology. We just had a little old mimeograph machine. It's where you put your paper in and you have some ink between and you roll it, and it was a mess. But I just want to acknowledge that it was the women that did the leg work, that did most of the work. And we never been recognized for it, but we were the real foot soldiers, as in every case. I was going to talk about, and Dr. King's dream. He said, that he's famous for that speech, I have a dream, but that's not what he was going to speak about up there. He was talking about America and, how we get the check that we can't cash, that's going to come back insufficient funds. And then Mahalia Jackson was standing up there tell him about the dream, Martin, tell him about the dream. And he did the famous, they call it now, the I Have a Dream speech. They didn't get back to the point that we still got the checks that's bouncing. And, but Langston Hughes wrote, the dream has been deferred. And Langston wrote, what happens to a dream deferred? Does it dry up like a raisin in the sun? Or does it fester like a sore and then runs? Does it stink like rotten meat? Or does it crust and sugar over like a syrupy sweet? Does it sag from a heavy load, or maybe it just explodes? What happens to a dream deferred? And that leads me into letting you know that the dream has been deferred. If you're watching these Tea Party people and how they're doing now, they're coming up with voter ID laws, they're coming up with the Voting Rights Act, they're messing with that. They're doing everything they can to put you back to the days of Jim Crow. I call it James Crow now. But, I'm writing this new poem called From Jim Crow to Mr. James Crow, because that's exactly what it is now. And I want you people to know, too, that we, the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party, we organized in '63, and we were a big part of getting the Voting Rights Act passed and the Civil Rights Act passed because of what we did. We were organized. We didn't have no money. We didn't have no telephones, but we had desire and determination. And that's what y'all gotta have now. Don't fool yourselves. You might be going to school, doing pretty good, getting your little grants or whatever you're doing, but I don't want you to go to sleep. You see what they're doing to Obama, and if they do that to Obama, what do you think they're gonna do to you? Okay. And I'm just gonna go now. I can't talk without doing one of my pieces. And this piece I wrote is called If You Don't Vote, Don't Cry. This is for all of you young people that think about not voting and why you don't vote and you're not even registered to vote. Well, I want you to hear this. If you don't vote, don't cry. We told you before to vote or die. When things get really bad and you have to walk because you can't buy gas and your walk is no longer all spiffy and spry, well, walk on, brother, because if you don't vote, don't cry. When you go to the store and the prices have gone through the ceiling and hit the sky, and you're walking around cussing and telling everybody that these prices are too damn high and you don't know what you're going to buy, well, if you don't vote, don't cry. If you find yourself between a rock and a hard place and you can't pay your mortgage and you have to downsize to a smaller space and you feel disgusted in this space and can't keep a tear from your eye, well, if you don't vote, don't cry. If you get laid off from your job in times when you were already hard and all you can, they sent your job to another land and all you can do is just show up, throw up your hand and ask God, why? Well, if you don't vote, don't cry. If you get really ill and you can't go to the doctor because you can't pay the bills, not to mention buying those expensive pills, and you feel just like you're gonna die, well, if you don't vote, don't cry. If you go off to school and you're complied with all of the rules, but you can't get a grant or a student loan and have to pack your bags and go back home, and you all angry and upset and tell your mama that the world is just passing you by, well, if you don't vote, don't cry. If you lose your food stamps in your Section 8 and you call your worker to get it straight and she tells you that John McCain cut your benefits and didn't say why, and you just let out a heavy sigh, well, if you didn't vote, don't cry. We told you before to vote or die. Thank you.
Also, Brother Ron is setting up. Margaret Block, if you liked what you just heard, she also has just poetry for sale. Margaret, for $5. I would highly suggest this. We always purchase copies when we come through, so she will have it for sale. Margaret, you have them on you. We can.
Yeah, I had a few. I didn't get that. I mean, I sold them before I got here.
Okay, so we have these available for sale as well for $5. Great poetry.
You took the part that once was my heart. Oh, why not take all of me? Yeah. Okay. How y'all feeling tonight? Y'all ready? Are y'all ready for a revolution? Are y'all fired up? Y'all fired up? Y'all ready to go? Say we fired up? We ready to go? We fired up? Ready to go? Blurred lines, baby. Give yourselves a round of applause. Okay, let me get started. So who the hell is this guy? Got about 20 minutes to, maybe about 16 minutes to explain myself here. Well, my name is Ron Hurd II, but I go by R2, C2, H2, the Artemis, and this is the We All Be movement. And also, I go by the name of Brother Ron, and I call myself an artivist. What the hell is an artivist? Well, it's really a person who's an artist and an activist, a person that uses his or her talent to affect social change and social justice. People that we think are artivists in our community, for example, people like Harold Belafonte, or some people might say John Legend or Kanye West or Paul Robeson. Paul Robeson. How many people know Paul Robeson is? Paul Robeson, Emperor Jones, Paul Robeson. Okay, Paul Robeson, Josephine Baker. Oh, even Louis Armstrong. You know, he said, oh, I could go to hell. You don't have no kids down in Little Rock, Arkansas. Give it to Louis Armstrong in Little Rock 9. Okay, anyway, so who the hell is that? All right, let's make it simple. I said I'm an artist, and let me see, I'm an author too. I write books too. You know, you got to do your little hustle. I'm from Memphis. We hustle and flow it. You know how it go. You know, it's hot out here for an artivist. You know what I'm saying? But anyway, this is my book right here. It's my first book I wrote. It's called James Fitzgerald, Jazz Lieutenant. And James Fitzgerald was a real brother. He actually was one of the first people, one of the first African Americans to play Carnegie Hall. He was the first black person to lead troops in the battle during World War I. But he was first and foremost an artivist and a jazz musician. He started one of the early black musician unions in the country. Back in the turn of the last century in New York City, if you was a black musician in New York City, not only were you playing a gig at these clubs and places, but also you had to wash the dishes, cook the food, wait the tables, and still get paid less than the white musician, who all they had to do was just to play their instruments. So he changed all that. He organized the Brothers of New York, the Clef Club Orchestra, things of that nature. He was the hero of George Gershwin. How many people know who George Gershwin was? poor getting best. So he used to listen to James Fisher play on the piano at this club called Baron Wilkes in Harlem when he was 7 years old. So that's another thing. But I mean, this guy was incredible. He really tried to advocate for black folks through music and organize people. He died real young at age 39. He was stabbed in the neck by his drummer because the drummer complained that he was, getting on his case for walking on and off stage doing performances. So he was just 39 years old when he died. But he's the reason why we know about W.C. Handy, the George Gershwins, and people of that nature. But this book I wrote and illustrated is on the Smithsonian Institute list for jazz books for young kids and adults. So this is back in 2005. And I say the best is yet to come. So I got this in my trunk and in my book. Right here. And I'm an artist as well. I know you like Obama, so I do artwork and things of that nature. So I do a little bit of everything. And I got cards on me. But that's all not even important right now. What is important right now, why in the hell am I on this panel with all these distinguished guests? Well, my thing is that I also use my talents, like I said, to affect social justice and change. I have a platform called the We All Be Group Incorporated. We officially became a nonprofit after Obama got on TV talking about the IRS scandal. It took almost a year to get the letter in the mail, but as soon as President Obama got on TV, the next day it was in the mail. And we got our official 501c3 status for We All Be Group Incorporated. But what I really do, what I'm interested in is how people are perceived. Brother Malcolm X once said that the media is the most powerful entity on earth. It can make the innocent guilty and the guilty innocent. And that's powerful because it influences the masses. So how you view yourself is not necessarily who you really are. How many people think they actually make choices where to go to eat? Where they're going to eat? Yeah, where they eat. Or how many people think when you vote for somebody, you actually make the choice for the best candidate in your favor? So think about that, the choices that you are allowed to play with. But not only that, you think about the civil rights movement. We talk about, how many people are familiar with Emmett Till? If it wasn't for the black press back in that day, with John H. Johnson, with Ebony and Negro Digest and things of that nature, getting that picture of Emmett Till out there to the world, there might not have never been a civil rights movement. If you think about all our greatest black leaders and stuff, they all knew the importance of controlling your image through the media. You think about Frederick Douglass, he had his newspaper, I believe the North Star. You think about Sister Ida B. Wells Barnett from Holly Springs, Mississippi, out in Memphis. She had her newspaper, the Free Speech and the Headlight, which was rare for a woman to be a journalist and also own her own newspaper. This back in the 19th century. But she said it best. She said that there is no greater educator than the press. The people must be informed before they can act. Before you can act on anything, you should know as much information as possible that is allowed. For example, I truly believe that information is the currency of the universe. The most powerful entities in this world is built on information. Who was one of the most powerful men this country had ever seen? J. Edgar Hoover. He was the head of the FBI. What did he do before he became the head of the FBI? He cross-dressed, of course. We ain't talking about that. But what did he do before he became the head of the FBI? He worked at the Library of Congress organizing the archives. At the Library of Congress. He knew that information is key. For him to stay in power for over 50 years, he had to have information. Information is the advantage you have over everybody else. You use that for gambling, you use that in banking, you use that in anything. So information is the currency of the universe. To have good information, like my brother Dick Gregory says, to have good information is good power. To have bad information is bad power. But information is power nonetheless. So you got everything. Think about Marcus Garvey, United Negro Improvement Association. Marcus Garvey had his own paper. This before, I always ask young people and people in general, what would Harriet Tubman be doing with Twitter right now? Exactly. What would Ivy Wells be doing with Instagram and Facebook? Exactly. We laugh at it. What would Frederick Douglass be doing with Instagram? We laugh about that because what I'm saying is the revolution won't be televised, but it will be podcasts, it will be Instagram, it will be Facebook, and it will be tweeted online. Everybody say it once again. The revolution will not be televised, but it will be podcasts, it will be Instagram, it will be Facebook, it will be YouTube, and it will be tweeted online. About, could Trayvon Martin happen without social media? Could Jenna 6 happen without social media? Could Occupy Wall Street happen without social media? So you all out there, the citizens of this world, are the gatekeepers of information. It is up to you all to get the information out there required to improve your status and ability to navigate in this treacherous system that a lot of people don't really understand. This is a system of white supremacy that we operate in. I just want you to let y'all to know that. And the media is an important weapon in promoting the agenda of white supremacy. For example, people a lot of times look at the justice system. How many people think Zimmerman was going to walk before they heard the verdict? All right? But you think about it. People are like, I'm so surprised, I'm so shocked. Well, you don't. Take a look. It's in our book. Come on now. If you read, you know things happen in cycles and patterns. So history constantly repeats itself, but you got to understand this. Power and justice are two different things. Power is about the upkeep of the status quo. Power does not respect justice. If power submit to justice, they have no power. Power is about keeping stuff away from you, like Sister Margaret said in her poem, that is vital. If you don't vote, it don't matter, so don't cry. But not just voting, it's about participation in a system that was built against your success. So we got to understand that right now, that don't confuse the just us system with just this. And don't confuse power with your best interest. I made this just up on the spot, you know, this is flowing. Hell, okay, let me think. Okay, well, you know, Ron, how can we find out the stuff you do? Well, our YouTube stuff, our podcast stuff, our Facebook. I'm trying to get into the Instagram, about to get into the LinkedIn. But be connected. The best way to stay current is to be on the scene, be accessible. You know, it's so important to have a presence, not only online, but offline, because people get it confused. Just because you create an online petition with 10,000 signatures, that ain't nothing but a damn propaganda tool. You know, that's not no real change, that's just propaganda. And while I do respect marching and singing, it's just a way to advance attention on an issue. Dr. King, I don't care how great of a speaker he was, that didn't solve a lot of things just by speaking. It brought attention to the issues, but the real work that was going to be done went through what Sister Margaret always said, organize, organize, organize. Frederick Douglass said, agitate, agitate, agitate. How you wash your clothes is through agitation. Nobody likes a snitch, let the snitches snitching for them. Nobody likes an agitator unless the agitators agitating and advocating for them. But understand the issues. Information will set you free. Education is about knowledge of self. You cannot have self-determination without knowledge of self. If your education did not teach you anything about where you come from, who you are, and where you're going, that's not a damn education. That's indoctrination. That's mental slavery. That's menticide. What the hell is menticide? Well, take a look. Is that all book? Okay, I'm gonna stop that. If you like, that's reading Rainbow. I'm dating myself, y'all. Come on. But don't take my word for it. Okay. Okay, I made a fool of myself. Thank you. How much more time I got? About 5 minutes? 5 minutes. I'm good. Look at that. I don't even need a teleprompter. Take that, President Obama. But and first of all, I want to say, be the change you want to see. I remember reading something about Harriet Tubman. And Harriet Tubman, like the old folks back in the day, they always said, we're going to wait for the one. We're looking for the one. When a baby was born, is that the one? Why don't you all be the one? Why not you? And who then? Charlie Parker, one of my greatest musicians, I love him, artist. Somebody said, well, Charlie Parker, y'all know who Charlie Parker is, right? Now y'all don't know who Charlie Parker is. Come on. Well, take a look. It's on YouTube. You know, you can listen to his music. Listen up. Okay. But Charlie Parker was asked, right before he died at a young age of 34, but he was a phenomenal jazz saxophone. He was a visionary. And somebody, well, Bird, how do you get so good? Were you born with a horn in your mouth? You know. And Bird said, well, no, Peter. Well, actually what happened was, for 4 years, I practiced for 10 to 15 hours a day on my saxophone. He practiced for 10 to 15 hours a day for 4 years on his saxophone. Think how much, like they said, to master something, it takes 10,000 hours. Think about if you practice on anything for 10 to 15 hours a day, what do you think will happen? You can't help but be a master, right? Even against your own best interest. I hate myself. Well, you're a master anyway. You're a master. I also think about the media. They feed us self-hate 24/7 a day. You're a master of your own demise if you believe the lie. The official story most often is the official lie. Think about that. So while I'm telling you, you got the tools and resources, why is it that folks who lived 100 years ago had more ambition to better their lot than people here today? Why is it that we have the tools necessary for our liberation and for our empowerment, but yet we don't have the mentality and the will to go with all to make it happen? Muhammad Ali once said, y'all know who Muhammad Ali is, right? The greatest of all times. Okay, he said, what did he say? He said, in order to be a great champion, your will must be greater than your skill. Do y'all have the will? It's not rhetorical. Do y'all have the will? Yes. Do you really have the will? Yes, sir. Do you want it? Do you want it? Y'all don't want it. Do you want it? Yes, do you want it? Yes, do you want it? Yes. We'll take it. I'm through. Thank you.
How y'all doing?
Great, sir. Great.
All right. Name our mothers, our fathers, all our ancestors. I'd like to greet everybody this evening. It's going to be hard to go behind my last two speakers because, you know, I don't have anything to play. I don't know any poetry. But hopefully we can talk through some of this history. I want to thank Professor Ortiz for inviting me here another year. This is the second time I've been able to come to the Proctor Oral History Program. I want to thank President LaForge for coming to greet us. It's rare that you get a college president that'll take the time out to greet something dealing with social movement. Usually they try to stay away from that stuff. I want to thank Professor Sanders for being here and the work that she's done and for her comments earlier. And I want to thank my good friend Margaret Block, who helped me with my book that's out there. I'm going to take a little twist from the book today, or a little focus on the Delta. It's called We Will Shoot Back. And what We Will Shoot Back looks at is how armed resistance played a role in destroying fear and intimidation in the state of Mississippi. That I know President Forge talked about how things are different now, okay? And part of the reason something, you could even make that statement is that some people picked up guns. That's the real part of it. Professor Sanders pointed out that the movement wasn't all nonviolent, and she's talked about because people were violent against us, but there were some people who decided to step up and to fight back. And so that's what my book looks at. This is a part of our struggle that is not really talked about. But through oral history, and that's what's great about this program, I looked at the quote from Margaret that's on the back of the program. Many of the SNCC people I talked to, many of the local people I talked to in Mississippi, they never really had an allegiance to nonviolence. So you can't really look at the Mississippi movement and say it was a nonviolent movement that won social change here in Mississippi. And so we want to talk through that, and I have a special focus on the Delta in this talk tonight. Now, it's also important for me to come here. Let me see, what pushes the slides forward here? Okay, now I'm getting it. Okay, because my personal family story starts in this county. My father was born in Bolivar County, to the northern part of the county, a place called Alligator, Mississippi. When President Forge talked to you about the alligators, yeah, that's real. My people actually came, or at least my father was the first child in our family that was born in Alligator, Mississippi. My people actually come from Georgia. Okay, but there's a story my dad used to tell me when I was a kid that gave me feelings of ambivalence. He told me that one time when they were in Alligator, they looked at a water tower and they saw the body of a black man hanging. And my grandfather was angry, and he went and grabbed his rifle, and he was going to go shoot the first white person he saw. He wanted to retaliate. My family, they were sharecroppers. They weren't professors or lawyers or anything. They were sharecroppers. My dad picked cotton until he was about 30 years old, okay? But they tackled my grandfather and disarmed him. Why? Because they knew if my grandfather retaliated, that could mean everybody in the family wiped out, right? And so that story kind of left me with this. On one hand, I felt pride in my grandfather because he wanted to step up and fight. But on the other hand, I understood the fear that was running through the family, right? And the reality is they could have been lynched. So again, that's what this story is about. Again, after slavery, sharecropping was very important in the Delta, right? And then I'm running through this quick because you know there were black landowners at first, and then a lot of the black land people who came here to own land were forced into sharecropping. We won't talk about that, but look at American Congo if you want to see that and talk about that. But let's look at this for real. This is in 1880, and you see the orange. Let me see, is my thing after I went outside to get this working? But you see the orange color on this map. These are counties that are anywhere from 70% to 90% black. This is 1880. So coming out of slavery, and I know a lot of Americans are geographically challenged. This is the southwestern part of Mississippi, the western part of Mississippi. Oh, shoot, I'm just walk up here. Because my laser's not working. This is the western part of Mississippi right here. So if you look at that, and the delta's in there, that you had to have if you wanted to have, Ron talked about white supremacy. If you wanted to maintain white supremacy, you had to use fear and intimidation in order to keep black people away, particularly from the polls, right? It's also used to keep black people from competing economically. Ron lives in Memphis. You know the story of Ida B. Wells and her friends who were lynched in Memphis, right? Yes, sir. And lynched in Memphis because they were successful businessmen, right? Y'all have heard about Black Wall Street. Okay, so this terrorism, and we don't oftentimes use that term with this, but if they said it was terror in Boston earlier this year, then black people lived through terror in Mississippi and throughout the South, 24/7 all year, right? So fear and intimidation was used to keep people in check. And I'll just show you some images. Of course, this image is from Union forces that were used to kind of stay between black folks who were armed, you see in this picture, and a white mob. But of course, we couldn't rely on the Union. They left after 1877, right? And left us to the terrorism we're going to face here. Anybody know, since y'all been studying Mississippi, what county is that up there? My grandfather's actually buried in Tunica County. 1874, because a black female child was killed, and the sheriff refused to arrest and detain the white man who was responsible for her death, black people rose up with guns, hundreds of black people. Sheriff left the town after that happened. After that, a ship with former Confederate soldiers came to suppress the black rebellion. And this is something we find a legacy that comes from slavery, where you had, if blacks even had a rumor of a rebellion, then whites from neighboring counties, particularly in these black majority areas, would come to suppress black rebellion. It happened again in LaForge County, Mississippi in 1889. Where at that time, the state militia was called to put down blacks who were protesting to renegotiate their contracts of work in LaForge County. Of course, they were organized by the Colored Farmers Alliance, and this is some representatives of that organization. Of course, you had the Ku Klux Klan coming up after slavery to help repress black people. Mississippi and Georgia, I live in Georgia now, they were back and forth over which state had the most lynchings. That was commonplace. Lynchings were commonplace, not only in Mississippi and Georgia, but American society in America from the 1870s all the way through the 1920s. Another force you had in the Delta was in the 1920s, you had the African Legion, which was a military detachment of the Marcus Garvey movement. A lot of times we think of the Marcus Garvey movement, we have pictures like this of people from New York, but the Marcus Garvey movement was more populous in Louisiana and Mississippi, percentage-wise, than it was in New York. You wouldn't see these uniforms as much in Mississippi, though. People were more clandestine if they were members of the African Union. The Marcus Garvey movement also discussed of developing communication networks of blacks in varying counties throughout the South, recognizing that tradition of white supremacists to gather from various counties to try to suppress blacks. You understand? So they wanted to counter that by having communication networks with blacks where we could come and reinforce and support each other. But the most important thing to think about during this period of time when lynchings were common, when Jim Crow laws were being put into effect, when you didn't see a lot of political confrontation of blacks, the most important thing I think to look at is blacks during that period. We're talking about from Reconstruction through really the early 1950s. Black people were doing what? They're building families, they're building lodges, they're building churches, they're building businesses, and this allows us the resources we need to be able to fight in a different period. One of the first large expressions of that was the Regional Council of Negro Leadership that emerges in 1952. And this was what Ebony magazine said about them. Today in Dixie, there's emerging a new militant Negro. He is a fearless fighting man who openly campaigns for his civil rights, who refuses to migrate to the North. You know, young people, y'all heard of David Banner said he was descended from the people who didn't leave. Y'all remember that? In search of justice and dignity, and is determined to stay in his own backyard and fight. So there were some people said that, you know, they weren't going to be run out of Mississippi. They weren't going to Chicago or California. That they were going to stay here and fight for justice. And they could assert that again after people built families, lodges, churches, businesses. They gave them the resources and a base to fight from. The leader of that movement was Dr. T.R.M. Howard, and was based in Mount Bayou, Mississippi. He was known to be armed. They would search him, and he would have guns hidden in his car, had a hidden compartment. I'm trying to go through this quickly so we can ask some questions. Simeon Booker, who worked for Jet, how many of y'all heard of Jet magazine? Okay, black people, if you haven't heard of it, we're taking away your ghetto pass. Okay, y'all can't come to the hood. You ain't heard of Jet? Okay, but Simeon Booker wrote for Jet. He came to Mississippi during that period of time. He said, firearms, protection, and security are ingredients of a successful civil rights program in Mississippi. The Negro social reformer must defend himself because he has no protection from the police, sheriffs, or state troopers. The reason many more Negro civil rights are not killed is because they are armed to defend themselves and their families. Okay, and of course, y'all know the story of Emmett Till, who was lynched in the Delta, right? And we know the story that his mother decided to have his corpse open casket, even though it was heavily mutilated, so people could see the terror. Where was this published again? Jet magazine. Everybody grandmama had that Jet sit up in the magazine rack if you were black. I don't care. I grew up in California. We had that Jet sitting right there. Okay. Now, when Mamie Till Mobley, and you see her in the middle standing next to T.R.M. Howard with the bow tie, she was protected by these people when she came down there. What she say? The people of Mount Bayou didn't tolerate any invasion of any kind. Okay. She said that she went to the bedroom and T.R.M. Howard, there was a machine gun behind the bedroom door. Okay, again, they had to protect themselves. And one person you might have heard of was this gentleman here, Medgar Evers. Now, one thing I would have a little slight different with your program says on the inside, third page, NAACP Field Secretary Medgar Evers, who was assassinated in '63, was a vocal advocate of armed self-defense and always carried a rifle in his car. He always carried a rifle, but he wasn't necessarily vocal. He was early on, particularly when he was working here in the Delta. Before he was became the state representative of the NAACP in the state, he used to say that black people needed a Mau Mau. Y'all know what a Mau Mau is? We'll talk about that in a second. And this Ebony magazine has this in 1958 from Medgar, saying NAACP Executive Medgar Evers once thought of a Mau Mau organization in Mississippi to get revenge. Now he believes in nonviolence to achieve a better life for Negroes. Read why he refuses to leave his home despite being on a death list in the November Ebony magazine. So Medgar is oftentimes thought of being a nonviolent person. But Medgar was like this. He just wouldn't talk about it, particularly after he got this position with the NAACP. The NAACP decided, because it had been run out of Mississippi so many times, that they need to put, y'all heard Obama talk about this red line in the sand? Well, the NAACP had that for Mississippi. They weren't going to be run out anymore. And they decided to put resources behind Medgar. But, up in New York, they didn't understand that Medgar, they didn't want him pushing a line talking about a Mau Mau or anything like that, so he had to stop talking about it. But he still believed in it. Let me give you evidence. Of course, the Mau Mau started in Kenya. It was called the Land and Freedom Army, and it fought against British colonialism. This is Ruby Hurley, who worked with Medgar. When Ruby Hurley and Medgar Evers dressed up like sharecroppers, and along with Amzie Moore, who many of you know about here, who's a native of this town, right? We'll talk about him in a second. They're the ones who dressed up like sharecroppers with a group of armed black men protecting them to get evidence on the Emmett Till lynching, right? This is what she said. Talk about nonviolent. He was anything but nonviolent. Anything but. He always wanted to go at it in a Mau Mau fashion. Y'all heard of this guy, Robert Williams? Yes. Robert Williams in North Carolina was a vocal advocate of armed resistance. He talked about it. He said to meet violence with violence. He even beyond that, other people don't quote the second part of that. He said meet lynching with lynching. He was in North Carolina. He said that when he was kind of angry, he had convinced a black family who a female member of that family was sexually assaulted by a white man, and after the white man was convicted, he was given a fine of something like $13, $16, something like that. So the family was looking at Robert Williams like, look, we wanted to get at this guy, and you made us go through the court. So he came out, the press, they put the mic up to his face, and this is what he said. But he also did arm black people to defend themselves, but he vocally talked about it. Medgar was different. He didn't talk about it publicly. But this is what another piece of evidence, this is what Merle Evers said. Said Medgar believed you must always be prepared for whatever comes our way. And we're talking about guns, the arms, collecting what we need to fight, if by chance we ended up in a race war, which he felt could possibly happen. He was thinking about a nation building a nation of black people. So he considered, and similar to Robert Williams, he considered the possibility that to avoid genocide, that black people might even have to form their own nation. Okay, now we look at this picture. This is a picture of some of the early members of SNCC in Mississippi. Of course, we have Curtis Hayes, now known as Curtis Muhammad. Many of you met Hollis Watkins. You see him, the young man with the trench coat, and Bob Moses right here. But this gentleman from this county, this big, strong black man, Amzie Moore. We talked about earlier today, a lot is not known about Amzie Moore like it needs to be known about Amzie Moore, okay? SNCC camp comes to Mississippi and it has a few nonviolent action campaigns, but that wasn't really their mode of activity in terms of nonviolent direct action. You know what I'm talking about, like sit-ins that are very disruptive? You didn't have a lot of sit-ins in Mississippi. You did have the Freedom Ride campaign that came through here, right? But not a lot. But back to Amzie Moore. He was described as a one-man protection agency. Okay, Amzie Moore was the first person that Bob Moses talked to in the state. He was given the information by the great Ella Baker, right? And he comes here, and Bob Moses, Amzie Moore basically became one of the primary elders for SNCC in the state. But he was not, again, nonviolent. And there's more I can tell you about him, but we could talk about this later. If you come to Amzie Moore's house to stay with him, this would be the routine. Like most homes, you might, they give you your pillows, they give you your pillowcases, they give you your sheets, but he's also going to give you a German Luger handgun. Again, not necessarily what I would call nonviolent. And Margaret mentioned how women were undervalued oftentimes, and they're undervalued by historians. And one of the things I have as evidence for that is I had a difficult time finding photos of many of the women I wanted to talk about. So I had to have a young artist, a young man, draw some images for me. This is a Laura McGee. Laura McGee was from Greenwood, Mississippi. She had a group of sons who were all in the movement with her. She was known to sit on her porch with her gun. The McGee family were known to be some tough folk. And because of their role in the movement, sometimes their home would be attacked, and her sons start shooting at the people who tried to firebomb their house. The sheriff came and said, "Miss McGee, will you tell your sons not to shoot?" What was her response? "I'll do the rest of the shooting myself." Okay, it wasn't just men with guns. Okay. Hartman Turnbow, southern part of the Delta in Holmes County. You heard the story, right? They come to his house in 1963. Why did they come to his house? Because a couple of weeks earlier, SNCC had organized a contingent of people to go to the county courthouse to attempt to register to vote. He wasn't a leader of the group. He was just a brother who was brave enough to go try to register. And when the sheriff, we talked about resistance, but there were snitches too, right? So they knew SNCC was coming, right? Because the snitches told the white power structure. And so when they get down there, the sheriff is there with his people. And the sheriff say, "What do you N-words want?" And people were a little bit afraid. And the person cleared his throat to say, "All we want to do is register to vote." Is Hartman Turnbow. Because of that, he was targeted. Their names were listed in the newspaper, and his name was put in the newspaper as the leader of the group. Okay? So they come to his house. Wife and daughter are asleep. They firebomb the house. He wakes up, but he surprises them coming out shooting. They take off, and he was able to save his wife and daughter. The next day, what happens? He's arrested for setting fire to his own house. He's arrested, but a campaign was waged by Bob Moses and others, and he was able to get out. Okay, was one of the primary elder figures around the SNCC movement. Of course, there was Freedom Summer in 1964. If you study the Mississippi movement, you know about that, of course, to build Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party, right? They built freedom schools around the state, literacy campaigns, voter education campaigns sprung out of that. And even in that, you see this photo at the Freedom House in Mileston, southern part of the Delta. People had to protect themselves. That was how they rolled, as we might say. A story that Margaret told me, another female, sister activist I couldn't find a photo of, Miss Janie Brewer. okay, 86-year-old woman, Tallahatchie County. Of course, Margaret had been organizing in that county. It was so rough, and y'all remember Tallahatchie is where they found Emmett Till's body, right? Okay, she had been organizing there. One time it got so hot she had to leave in a hearse. They had to get her out of town. But and just give this sister a hand. I guess Harriet Tubman's spirit got up in her, because you know how Harriet Tubman escaped from slavery and she went back. They ran Margaret out of town, she went back, organized some more. She goes back, she hooks up, and she finds Mrs. Brewer, okay, 86-year-old woman. She organizes it to the level that other SNCC people can come. Some of them from Howard University. I won't tell them some of the other stuff you told me, Margaret. But they come back, and they organize there, right? And again, they take contingents of people downtown. Okay, when you take them downtown, what happens? The next night, there's a bunch of white supremacists coming to intimidate them. So this elder comes up with a strategy. The second time they go, when they come back, there are people along the side of the road with guns, waiting for these people who come to attack them. But that was during the daytime. You know what time they attack, right? They come at night. So Mrs. Brewer, she has this plan. She gets some of the SNCC people, some of her grandchildren, some of her children. You know, she's 86-year-old, so her children, they ain't no youngsters, right? And the grandchildren got some age on them too. But she puts them out in the cotton fields, and they have guns. Yeah, the nonviolent SNCC people have guns, and they're waiting for these people to come back. Then Margaret, another young woman, Mrs. Brewer, they in the house making, y'all know what a Molotov cocktail is? Don't try this at home. You put gasoline in the bottle, a dry rag, and you can light the rag. It's a firebomb. Margaret was afraid because, you know, Miss Brewer, I said, is 86 years old. So she pouring gas and it's getting on the floor. And Margaret's thinking, man, we're going to die and they're going to think it was a Klan. But then the folk come at midnight. So when they come at night, excuse me. According to her plan, a floodlight is flashed on them. Y'all know what it is. It's dark in Mississippi during the night when you ain't in Jackson or in Cleveland in the city or somewhere like it's dark between here and Mount Bayou, right? So they flash that floodlight, disorients them. Then the folk come out from the fields, the cotton fields. Then Miss Brewer comes out with a Molotov cocktail. Runs them out. Again, it wasn't just men who involved in this movement. Another development that happens in the South is this thing called the Deacons for Defense. I'm gonna wrap up right quick. It was a paramilitary group that was formed. And of course, you know, after James Murdoch was shot in 1966, I'm gonna go through quickly. King and others decided that they were going to continue this march, but they were protected by the Deacons for Defense. And this brother, Ernest Thomas, said, if white man starts shooting again, you know where to find them. Okay, because they were going to get them. In Belzoni, he said it's time for black men to start taking care of their black women and children. Even though sisters had been fighting now, but the deacons kind of had this more masculine tone to their organization. I want to close with this person, Rudy Shields, who organized boycotts in Belzoni and other places. He was also involved in Indianola in a boycott, but he organized something during a movement called the Spirit. And these are people, if you broke the boycott, you were going to get punished. You understand what I'm saying? In other words, I always thought before I entered this study that black people just supported boycotts because it was all black, that was the thing to do. Okay, but no, it wasn't just that. So how do you organize a boycott in those days? They would get their demands together. Things like We want to have jobs in the public sector. We want to have jobs in stores downtown, other than just sweeping up and stuff. But behind the counter, we want those type of jobs. We want black police, black firemen. We want the desegregation of our schools. But we also want our elders, when they go to the store, not to be referred to as boy, a girl, an auntie, or aunt, but call them Mr. and Mrs. Okay, we want just common courtesy and respect. They would have a big church meeting, and then they would say, these are the demands. How many people support the demands? Everybody say you're down. How many people are willing to boycott for this? Now, they'd ask people to stand up. Now, think about this. Some people might not have been real serious, but if your mama or your grandmama's standing up, you gotta stand up. If that girl you here trying to hit on is standing up, you gotta hit up. Right? You gotta stand up, right? So Rudy Shields organized the people, so if you broke the boycott, you were gonna have some consequences and repercussions, as Bernie Mac used to say. Some consequences and repercussions. You know, who did they get for that? Did they get professors like me or Dr. Ortiz? No, because I see an elder coming out the store with some sugar, I'm gonna let her go. But if you get a young thug with the thug life mentality and then you get them sparked up on some movement stuff, they might do it. So we're gonna close with that. And thanks for having me here. If you get a chance, get the book. It's on Kindle. If y'all know, y'all do it that way too. Peace.
Now we have time for some questions and some answers and some dialogue. Again, Professor Umoja's book is ready for sale, but let's have some questions and some thoughts to begin with. And if you could raise your hand, and when you ask the question, if you could tell us who you are, where you're from, and give us your question. I think we have a lot of interesting thoughts, interesting things to kind of think about. So questions? Yes, if you could.
So I'm already breaking the rules. This isn't a question. I'm Sarah from the University of Florida. I just want to say I think it's a really powerful gesture that you took the extra step to get these illustrations of these women, because a lot of historians would say, well, they don't exist, and they throw their hands up and move on because they have a lot of work to do. But as someone who works with these stories every day, I hear about Mrs. Brewer, and I've always wanted to see her face, and I've always just accepted that that's something that is not going to happen. But I feel like this gesture that you made has brought that history back to us, and I really appreciate it.
That's just the start, because I knew I could not do this without representing her. I mean, she's a focal part of the book, but I couldn't find her image. And so I actually called Margaret on the phone, and I said, tell me what she looked like. And I gave the information to a young artist. I know that's probably not a good likeness, but I look at this as a work in progress. So we're going to get it together. Who knows, you know, Margaret's going to actually take me at some point in the future to meet the family, so hopefully that can bring it about. I hope, I just hope the movement photographers, and I don't know what was going on. Do you have an opinion on that, Margaret? Why? Because a lot of the women, I couldn't find. I could find a lot of pictures of the men. But I even had a hard time finding a picture of your brother, and I didn't find one I thought was good enough to put in the book.
Oh, it's lots of them of him. But yeah, the movement, well, we have a lot of pictures, and you should get Ben Alliance's book. He has a lot of images, like Miss Hamer and a lot of people. I was paranoid, so I didn't let nobody take no pictures of them. I thought they could have been for Clan or whoever, I didn't know. And especially a white boy like Danny Lyons. He was from Georgia and had a straw hat on. And I would turn around every time I saw him. But it's a lot of women images in the book, in the books. There are pictures out there.
Yeah, I just couldn't find the ones I focused on. Like,
Yeah,
like
Miss
Ms.
Brewer.
Brewer,
I got a picture of, you talking about Ms.
Ms.
Lauren McGee?
McGee. And there's another image, since it wasn't in the Delta, I have, Ms. Ora Cooks, whose house was dynamited, and she was able to alert the community by shooting back.
I would also say to add that it's so important to document your own history, because you will always be a marginalized player in your own narrative if you don't tell your own story. So it should have been upon the people in the movement and us to document this history like we're doing right now, to tell the story that need to be told for posterity.
Thank you again for your presentations. My name is Justin Gunnerman at the University of Florida. I had a question specifically about how they were able to get these guns. I'm sure they couldn't just go into a Walmart back then and say, I'd like to purchase X number of rifles. So how were they able to build these networks?
People were hunters back then, and we had resources. People were, they hunted. That's how I met the Brewers. They taught me how to shoot. I wouldn't dare shoot a rabbit. Because, like I told them, it wouldn't be fun if the rabbit had a gun. But they had guns because a lot of people were hunters, even the people that lived in town. And guns were readily available back then. Because I think white people thought we didn't have sense enough to shoot at them. And it scared them that night we shot at them. They didn't shoot back, they left, they ran off. They sent the game warden out there and said, I was out there shooting deers out of season.
Another thing to add on to that is, and I agree with Margaret, from my research, and she knows because she was there, from my research, people had weapons, but the key thing was ammunition. So in a lot of communities, when it was hot, it was difficult to get ammunition, so you had to oftentimes go to a neighboring county or state to buy ammunition to bring in. And then and we don't hear a lot about this, but you see in Tim Tyson's book about Robert Williams, that people in neighboring states bought guns and ammunition for people and brought them to the South. And when you had the Deacons in Natchez, Mississippi, there were people in California raising money for them out there for guns, ammunition, communication equipment, things of that nature too. So it was, the solidarity movement, and all the solidarity movement wasn't necessarily nonviolent either.
And I would also add to that Amzie Moore, Megan Evers, Charles Evers, Robert F. Williams, all these guys were World War II veterans, Korean War veterans, Deacons of Defense, were all trained in the military. And also with Amzie Moore, he was a postal worker, right? Exactly. So he understood the power of distribution before there was the internet.
And he slept with 2 guns. He told me one time he had to sleep with 2 guns under his pillow because you didn't know which way he was going to be attacked. And if you go to his house and look in the back bedroom has a window up high. It's not a regular window. And I asked him why he had that window like that. He said in case somebody to shoot in his house, they wouldn't hit him because that's where he slept at. In the window, he had the window up really high over his bed, so nobody could shoot through his window at him.
Margaret, did you build that house?
Yeah.
Okay.
And it's a shame we let that go.
Florida. Because the civil rights history for mainstream students is really focused on the nonviolence part, do you think that the study of violence in the civil rights movement kind of shifts the story in a negative way to make people believe that we didn't get our rights through peaceful manners or peaceful means anymore?
There really ain't nothing negative about self-preservation. Self-defense. We weren't gonna let them kill us.
And I think part of the confusion is how the movement is sometimes tactically projecting itself. And so, for instance, what is called the Student Nonviolence Coordinating Committee, but they were protected oftentimes in this state by indigenous people. But that wasn't talked about. Again, when I talked about the different approach from Medgar to Robert Williams, Robert Williams was different from everybody else, from most people before 1965. because a lot of people practice armed self-defense, but they just didn't talk about it. The nonviolent movement was projected. Why, and why? Because particularly if you want to get support from northern white liberals, you know the image of black people, particularly black men with guns, scares the hell out of white people. So if you want to get support from the president, if you want to get support from the Democratic Party in the North, and not in the South, right? If you want to get some, people to give financial contributions to paint the image of a nonviolent. I'm not saying that people didn't practice nonviolence, but some people were what I call tactically nonviolent. Some people were philosophically nonviolent. In other words, they actually believe that through nonviolence that you can ultimately get to the beloved community, right? There would be a feeling of reconciliation. There would be shame of the perpetrators of this violence. They would feel ashamed for what they did. But some of them guys are bullies. And when I grew up, the only thing that could stop a bully was a good behind whooping. Or they had to at least be forced to respect you.
We were nonviolent in front of the cameras. Y'all saw Mr. C.W. Y'all saw Mr. C.W. Steptoe back there. Well, and Mr. Hartman Turnbow, he kind of stuttered when he talked. And one day we were in Liberty, Mississippi, and we were at a meeting, and Mr. Turnbow said, well, I tell you what we ought to do. We ought to just shoot up a few of them. Ms. Amber goes, Mr. Turnbow, we non-violent. He said, sometimes. And I'm going, yeah, I'm with you, Mr. Turnbow. And Ms. Amber like, good, you know better than that.
And also I would add too, name one revolution in human history that wasn't bloody. That blood was not shed. Name one. You can't think of one.
Certainly not the American one.
Yeah, no.
Yes, sir.
I know that.
Thank you all. Good evening. I'm Jack Davis. This portion of the story is a part that is seldom talked about. And just recently, research and a lot of information is being created and distributed on it. How responsive were the individuals? Ms. Black is phenomenal. I love sitting here listening to your stories and the participation and activism that you were involved in. But how responsive were other people that you talked to?
Did I talk to in my research?
Exactly.
Well, it's mixed. Some were begging to tell the story because they felt they'd been mischaracterized. People like Hollis Watkins in particular, he was a big help to me because actually I met him because I was teaching in Morehouse before and I taught his son. I looked down my roll and I saw Hollis Watkins Jr. Okay, that's probably his son. So, and he set up an interview with his dad, but he hooked me up with other interviews because he's always felt that that's been something that he was mischaracterized about his history. So some people were willing, some people I tried to interview and they were like, man, why you want to talk to me about that? So it was mixed. One person I talked to was in the Deacons for Defense in Louisiana, I'm trying to remember his name, but he said, son, I'm still worried about the FBI. I did do one interview where, and I gave folks the option of not disclosing their name. So some people would talk to me if I didn't use their name publicly. But that was only in a couple of cases. And one or two cases I suggested they don't give me their name after they told me about it. I said, okay, we're not going to use your name. We're going to create a pseudonym for you. Because, I think as a oral historian, and I don't know if this fits the principles or not, but I feel I want to look out for the safety of people I'm interviewing. I actually did an interview one time. I tell you this now because the person is dead. With the wife of C.O. Chin.
Yeah.
Okay, I was that time again. I was working in Morehouse. This is when I was working on my dissertation, and I came to the house and Mr. Chin wasn't there. and his wife was there, and she, at a certain point, she started feeling comfortable with me. And I said, well, ma'am, you mind if I turn on the tape? And she says, no, go right ahead. So she starts talking, and then she talks about him killing a white guy. I turned the tape off. I said, wait a minute, because you know they're already storing you prep before you go interview folks. I didn't see that nowhere. So I said, ma'am, who knows about this? She said, well, nobody. I said, we're gonna erase this part. We're gonna start again. But you know, I didn't feel, that could have been a sexy story for me to tell. But no, I'm not trying to put anybody in jail. You know, having new investigations. I don't want my career or my name linked to anything like that. So, but some people are dying to tell their story and want that to be wanted to be told. So it was mixed, but it was mixed up. But it was more people wanting to tell me the story than there were people who were still concerned about, you know, a case or something.
Well, we want to get to the book signing or book signings. Are there any questions, or perhaps our panelists would like to have the last word and maybe kind of wrap up with some final freedom thoughts?
I would say this, you looking at us, there's 3 generations of people on this panel. 3 generations, and if we're gonna have a movement in this country, we're gonna have intergenerational dialogue and commitment. That's all I got to say, thank you.
I'm tired, but I got my niece sitting out there, because life of Cartwright, she gonna take the flight up, now, because I'm gonna train her.
Got your tape?
All I have to say is, again, I'm honored to be on this panel with Margaret Wright and with Brother Hurd, who's doing tremendous work in the media, as he talked about. But I'm also Professor Ortiz. Tremendous work as a scholar, and it's just great to see. A lot of professors won't, at a research one institution, will not invest in their students like I see him do. And so I just want to say it's a blessing for University of Florida. I'm sure some other people might want to snatch him up and take him somewhere else, but it's a blessing for him to be here at the University of Florida. And he's a scholar that has a national respect, national reputation, but he's also a good person. So, you know, I just want to give him another hand.
Thank you. All right, thank you. What a wonderful panel. Let's give our panelists another round of applause, please. And again, we have books in the lobby. Professor Umoja is going to stay with us, but Margaret also has books of poetry. Brother Ron also has, and James Reese. So please stick around, and we'll continue to carry these lessons with us in our hearts, in our hands, in our minds. If you're students here at Delta State, talk to Arlene Sanders, Professor Sanders, a wonderful resource. Get involved in your communities. Going. Thank you very much.
Ooh.